Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's Provost lecture. And if you're a visitor, welcome to Westmont. It's also my pleasure to introduce our speaker for this afternoon. Some of you, I hope, heard his wonderful talk at the convocation this morning, and so you may have heard some of this information then. But for those of you who didn't attend the award convocation, Dr. Brandon Rickabaugh is Associate Professor of Philosophy and Research Scholar of Philosophy of Technology and Culture at Palm Beach Atlantic University. He has degrees from all the right places, including a PhD in philosophy from Baylor University, where he won a prestigious postgraduate fellowship that allowed him to do grad level study in neuroscience for a year. He's the author of, or co-author of, numerous articles and 3 books, most of which are about consciousness and the nature of the human person. One of those books, co-written with his mentor, JP Moreland, is The Substance of Consciousness, a comprehensive defense of substance dualism. That was published by Wiley Blackwell in 2023. That book, or rather this book, is the winner of this year's Dallas Willard Research Center Book Award. This award was created in 2015 to recognize and encourage exemplary scholarship reflecting the intellectual commitments that characterized Dallas Willard's work throughout his career. These commitments are: 1, robust metaphysical realism. 2, we've got the realists here. 2, epistemological realism. 3, the development of comprehensive, integrative models of the human person. 4, the development of objective measurement for different Christian formative practices that, in principle, can place these practices in the domain of publicly accessible knowledge. Now, that's the language of academic philosophy. Translated into plain English, it means something like this: things are real, and we can know them. People are real too, and they have bodies, minds, wills, and souls. And we should study people in ways that do justice to these facts, and that show how and whether Christian spiritual practices really do work. Across his many books and talks, Dallas Willard wove these ideas and others into a vision that has been profoundly influential in the lives of pastors and lay people. Dallas would insist that this vision is neither new nor original, but is in reality nothing other than the vision of Jesus. That said, parts of this vision have been attacked as unscientific, not least belief in the human soul. But Rickabaugh's and Moreland's book, as its subtitle states, is a defense of substance dualism, which is the technical name for the philosophical idea that humans have 2 parts: a material body and an immaterial soul. I don't think I'm divulging any secrets if I say that belief in a soul has been under attack in academic circles for a long time. But Rickabaugh and Moreland think there's a lot at stake here, and they have not only defended substance dualism from some of these attacks, but they've mounted new and ingenious positive arguments for belief in the soul of their own. Their book is already having a big impact, so we asked Dr. Rickabaugh to share some themes from that book today with the Westmont community. And the intriguing title that he gave us is "With the Soul Unseen, We Turn to Machines, Jesus' Philosophy of Technology." He will speak for somewhere in the vicinity of 45, 50, 55 minutes, after which we'll have 15 or 20 minutes for question and comments from the audience. One more thing before I begin. I'd like to thank Patty and F. Martin for their support. They were here earlier this morning. Some members of the Willard family are here with us today, and we're grateful to them for their friendship and encouragement. Finally, this event is organized under the auspices of Provost Kim Deneu's office, So thank you to her as well. Now, please join me in welcoming Dr. Brandon Rickabaugh.
Thank you all for being here. It's a real privilege to be here, in part because of many friends that I've got at the Martin Institute, but also because Dallas means so much to me, both as a person for the few years that I knew him and bothered him in his office hours as often as I possibly could, but also his work just transformed my life in a really important way. When Dallas, if you don't know the story, when Dallas went into philosophy when he started as a pastor, and he came to the conclusion that we've got a problem about how to live like Jesus that's at the level of not understanding what a person is, which is at the level of not understanding what the soul is. And he started me on that trajectory early on. My work now is in relation to the nature of the soul and consciousness with the nature of developing technologies, especially artificial intelligence and its applications in life. And the idea here with the title, with the soul unseen we turn to machines, is we both depersonalize ourselves as things progress away from a view of ourselves as bodily souls, but we more and more not just become more and more machine-like, but more and more turn to machines as a way of outsourcing our humanity in many ways. Dr. Martin Luther King, when he won the Nobel Prize, he gave a talk to some of the most brilliant and influential people in the room. And you could guess as to what he was going to talk about, and that would be issues of justice. But if you were like me, you would be wrong as to how he got into that. This talk, like the last sermon that he ever gave, was on technology. Modern man has brought this whole world to an awe-inspiring threshold of the future. It's the very first line in his talk at the Nobel Prize conference. He has reached new and astonishing peaks of scientific success. He's produced machines that think and instruments that peer into the unfathomable reaches of interstellar space. He has built gigantic bridges to span the seas and gargantuan buildings to kiss the skies. His airplanes and spaceships have dwarfed distances, placed time in chains, and have carved highways through the stratosphere. This is a dazzling picture of modern man's scientific and technological progress. Yet, in spite of these spectacular strides in science and technology, and still unlimited ones to come, something basic is missing. There is a sort of poverty of spirit, which stands in glaring contrast to our science and technological abundance. The richer we've become materially, the poorer we have become morally and spiritually. We have learned to fly the air like birds and swim the seas like fish, but we've not learned the simple art of living together as brothers. In the last sermon that he preached, he says, "The means by which we live have outdistanced the ends for which we live. Our scientific powers outrun our spiritual power. We have guided missiles and misguided men." He saw a strong connection between the depersonalization that had been happening before in culture and was gradually increasing and then started to take shape even faster, with the idea that technology is going to solve all problems. And the idea of technology being the sort of thing that solves our problems is based on a view of human persons where he thinks that we've lost sight of the spiritual. We've lost sight of the human person as bodily soul. We have foolishly minimized the internal of our lives and maximized the external. We've absorbed life and livelihood. You could have given this talk today. It would have been really lovely to hear that today. But what he's pointing out here is an old problem that goes back to Plato, and it's this issue of human flourishing in relation to technology. So minimizing the internal or maximizing the external and minimizing the internal, I want to think of as maximizing machine and minimalizing the soul. There'll be three parts that I want to talk about. The first part, becoming machine. What's gone on there and where are we at here with this? And part two, what is the spirit of our technology? And our technology indeed has a spirit. It doesn't have a soul. Got to give good arguments for that, but there's certainly a spiritual element to our technology. And then last, what is the soul of Jesus' philosophy of technology? I think Jesus did have a very profound understanding of technology, and I hope to give an argument for that. So part one, this becoming machine. It's clear if you look at culture, to many, that culture should be rightly understood as secularized, as we're a secular culture. I'm not convinced that that's true. I think we're deeply religious and largely reactionary to earlier Christian culture in various ways. What I think that we have is a very depersonalized culture. I think what explains what's going on in our culture today is depersonalization. The technology industry is arguably compulsively spiritual and religious. There's not a sort of anti-religion there. But there is, it seems to me, an anti-person there, a depersonalization that's going on. Now, there's this disillusionment problem too. The studies on disillusionment are interesting. The idea of disillusionment is when you come to understand that what you thought you knew before is no longer the case. And the studies over the past 8 years or so has described our culture as one of large disillusionment, where people have lost confidence that it's possible to know much of anything, certainly anything that has to do with the spiritual life or the moral life or politics even. The studies show that there has been a radical decline in trust for politicians and church leaders, school principals even in one of the studies. And I take it that part of this disillusionment comes in tandem with the rise in depersonalization. It's hard to trust another person if you don't know what a person is, or if you don't know another person as a person. And if you reduce people to bits of information, statistical analysis, if you reduce human persons to likes or shares, right, on social media, you're going to have a very disillusioned sort of way of looking at life, because now the spiritual depth of things have been removed. Dallas would ask people all the time, and now I've inherited this, and ask my students this too. I ask, who is studying psychology? Who is studying sociology? Who is studying any sort of discipline that has to do with caring for human persons? And Dallas would ask them, in your studies, have you ever taken a class that discussed what a human person is? And in his time, he said no one was able to tell him yes. In my time studying neuroscience, that question was just not on anyone's radar. And I think that's, I would be very shocked to see that this idea of being able to understand what a human person is at a non-mechanistic level is at the sort of front end of the research that's being produced in terms of the neurosciences and in the technology industry right now. I'll show a little bit of that more, but the idea here is that the funding that goes principally toward research on the nature of human persons is not at the level of human persons. It's at the level of mechanisms, at the level of pushes and pulls. Depersonalization, I'm thinking of broadly here, is just when you conceive of or when you treat yourselves or others or God as an object, as a mere object. One way to understand this, I think, is between two levels of explanation, or two different kinds of explanation, really. So there is a mechanistic explanation of some phenomena in the world and a personal explanation of some phenomena in the world. So here's an example. This is my son Sawyer. Rite of passage, I took him to Guitar Center. Got him his first guitar. He knows 2 chords already. proud of him. Now, what explains what was going on here? Well, on a mechanistic explanation, you could explain everything that happened in terms of my joy of bringing Sawyer to this, what used to be my church before I started following Jesus, to find an instrument that I loved playing and continue to love playing, to give it to him in a way that I think would bring us together, in a way that I think would help promote his character by frustrating him, right? Perhaps might bring joy and fun to other people at some point. If you want to understand it, though, mechanistically, it's going to be at these facts that don't have anything to do with me as a person or Sawyer as a person. And it won't have anything to do with my desires or my intentions. It'll have to do with very, very subpersonal analysis. Let's say socioeconomic statistics will be one way of evaluating what went on there. We bought a used guitar, right? Very cheap used guitar. You want to explain that? The explanation might be at socioeconomic statistical level, or more popularly by neurological or neurobiological functions. If you want to understand what was really going on there was some sort of neural causal structure going on, and it extends past me into my environment. And that's part of the causal story that got me to the right place with this other person, Sawyer, which is reducible in some way to his neurological states or functions. Might not be identical to, but you explain his behavior in that way. And if you can do that, then you can describe it by statistics. And now it will just be a probability calculus that you can work out as to why we ended up there. And the whole story can be told at the level ultimately of physics as to why it is that I was there with him and why I gave it to him, why I purchased this guitar for him, why I included him in going to this actual physical location. And now from the inside, that doesn't seem to be at all to me what was going on. I thought I had some irreducible kind of fundamental explanation that had to do with my desire and beliefs and intentions to give something to Sawyer where he was going to feel loved as a person. I was not hoping for any neuronal to neuronal causal activity there. It's got to happen, I think. And the story there is important, but I think the story is actually told in a more accurate way by attending to the personal explanation. So here you're going to explain what's going on in terms of the person as a whole, or is what I like to call a bodily soul. So I'm going to reference the mind here. I'm going to reference my thoughts and my emotions. I think that Sawyer's ready for this. I think that this would mean a lot to him. The emotions that I have towards him, the affection that I have towards him as a person. My will is going to be involved with this as an aspect of me, right? Not something that's reducible to something external to me or that I'm not even caught up in. And it will also have to do with facts about my body as a bodily soul, not just a body in the third person taking up space in some way that's going to be just describable in third person terms, but my body as embodied, uniquely tied to my mind, my will, my thoughts, my emotions. And it'll also have to do with factors about social dimensions, how it was that I was raised, influences that I had in my life that I hope to get him caught up in as well. But then it'll also have to do with this issue of soul. What is it that binds all of these things together and makes them unified into one whole person? This is going to be the level of explanation that we all live in, and that will make sense of life as we experience it, at least. How would you explain Sawyer's baptism this way, though? The guitar thing seems maybe a little bit further removed, but what's going on here? Is it reducible to just what's going on with my body, with what's going on with Sawyer's body? Is it just sociological facts about how we're there, surrounded by our church and family? How is it that you explain what's going on here? I think we can't lose sight of the deep meaning that we enter into and participate in these sorts of events. And the dominant explanation and mode of explanation of what goes on in our lives is now subpersonal. And when it's subpersonal, you lose quite literally the human person. But you can't have a human person as a human person without there being something that unifies that human person, makes it a whole, a unified ontological whole. That the argument that I'll give tomorrow is focused just on that. But let's just say this: if you get rid of the soul, if you get rid of some unifying substance, what you're going to be left with is functions and aggregates of parts. That's the exact sort of thing that you describe with a machine. There's going to be pushes and pulls, there's going to be levers, there's going to be buttons, and it'll be described at that level. And if you stay there, you will never get to the level of a person. You won't ever get to the level of this. So where's the soul going on in this? Well, again, I think what happens here is we have turned ourselves to machines in this sort of way that Martin Luther King Jr. pointed out, in that we have valued the externalized features that can be measured in one particular way, although they're exceptionally difficult and maybe even insoluble problems about how to give psychological explanations for people's behaviors, just in terms of the principles of how the studies are done. But the idea here is that if you lose the person, you will not be able to discover things about life as a person. Turning to machines is a way of depersonalizing ourselves and others. The moral component there is huge, because machines fundamentally are extensions of our powers and capacities. All technology is that. And the extensions of our powers and capacities are a necessarily moral dimension, and they will have a tendency to control and manipulate ourselves and others. Now, the soul could be manipulated, but in different ways, not by pushes and pulls. It's going to happen at the level that's more pernicious, more sinister. It's going to be at the level of, let's say, shame or guilt. And you might think, well, hold on, we can give an account of shame or guilt without ever referencing a person. We can just talk about statistics on behaviors and behavior modification. Or you could think about neurobiological facts. But once you get there, the interesting thing is that if you get to that level, then you lose sight of what a person is, you lose sight of yourself, you lose sight of any sort of accountability to what you do, and you externalize it all. The easiest sort of way to get away with any sort of immorality is to make what's going on very vague. And if you lose the person, you lose the moral weight of the situation. This is Martin Luther King's fundamental argument there. He was a personalist. He had this bodily soul kind of view. And he thought, like Edmund Husserl before him, that if you focus on the physicality, the mere physicality, the pushes and pulls, the what you get out of physics, you're going to lose the spiritual and moral life. The soul is necessary for that. Marilyn Robinson, she's a really wonderful author. If you've not come across her, I really encourage you to read. She says this: whoever controls the definition of the mind controls the definition of humankind itself, and culture, and history. What's going on with the sort of definition of the human person there? Well, I think it's even greater depersonalization, greater mechanization here. So here's where I'll just pivot a little bit and just talk about AI in terms of its application and in terms of its cultural meaning. The story of AI is exceptionally old. Plato gives an argument about whether or not a machine can become conscious way back then. He was ahead of the curve, and it turns out the problem that he was wrestling with is the problem that neuroscientists can't figure out today, or computer scientists can't figure out today. He was onto something. He was onto something. So think about what technology and AI tells us about what a human person is. So Pamela Kordick, she was wrote probably the most insightful and inside understanding of what was going on at the birth of of AI and the birth of AI applications in technology originally. She says, to know intelligence well enough to be able to build a working model of it is surely one of the most intellectually exciting and spiritually challenging problems of the human race. To do so is to know ourselves as we've always yearned to make us a part of nature instead of apart from it. And such a model promises to be an extension of those human capacities we value most, our identifying properties, which we sum up as our intelligence or our reason. The thinking machine would amplify these qualities as other machines have amplified the other capacities of our bodies. Now, there's a particular story to be told about how it is that we shifted towards talking about artificial intelligence. But notice what's going on here with McCormick. She's saying that what the prime indicators of what a person is, what we should value most about our identifying factors and the spiritual aspect of our lives, is in terms of intelligence and reason, and understood in a very narrow sense, in a very problem-solving sense. So it's going to be an issue about the amount of data or information that you can hold at one time, the speed at which you can process it, and the efficiency at which you can solve a predetermined problem. And one of the problems with technology is that it shifts our focus towards what questions we should even be asking and what problems are worth spending time on and how you should solve them. So you might want to know, you might think, like, well, are the problems that are being sold to us as the things that we need to make our lives easier actually the problems that we have? The promise of technology is often that it's going to give us more time to do other things, and that's not turned out so well. Now, I'm not anti-technology, obviously, I'm not saying that. But what I am is anti-being towed by technology. I am very much opposed to technology and technologists telling us what a human person is, telling us what is going to make our lives better, telling us how it is that we know ourselves, and then telling us how to live life that way. It is going to be a further and further progression towards mechanization. Roger Fellows, a very famous computer scientist, he says, the computer is the most complex technology ever devised by man, and we hold it up as a mirror to our own souls. And the strangeness there is that, well, when you hold it up, that mirror shows us that we have no souls. In fact, that mirror might tell us we're not anything like that thing that's staring back at me. In fact, there might not even be one sort of thing staring back at me there at all. I might just be a sort of collection of behaviors, or I might be a collection of processes. I might be a mysterious box that gets the right causal inputs with the right causal outputs. And the excitement here is that, look, we're creating more and more machines that are just like that, and they're telling us who we are. Alan Newell, one of the original AI architects, I see the computer as the enchanted technology. Better, it is the technology of enchantment. I mean that quite literally. Quite literally. Now, technology is very, very interesting. I like robotics, for example. I will nerd out on robotics. I think that that's fun. I don't think of it as an enchanted technology, though. I don't add. What is it that makes something enchanted? What is it that makes something spiritual? It is going to be the mark of someone's intentions. They craft it into something, right? The enchantment happens on the side of the person creating the sort of thing, and the greater ability that the craftsman has to imbuing their intentions onto that thing, the more beautiful it usually becomes. And the more interesting it usually becomes, because we want to know what that signifies to that person. You might think, well, AI art is going to be really disappointing when I want to hear the story of what did this thing go through to get that produced. Underwhelming. You're not going to hear a story about how they struggled through a particular area in a war part of Poland or something. You're not going to hear a story about struggling through poverty. You're not going to find a struggle through identifying what's going on inside them and getting it out to the world. What you're going to find is some level of sophistication at a computational level. And that'll be pretty disenchanting, right? Well, if you have a view of the human person that is not fundamentally grounded in the nature of the soul, that story is going to be the same story about you. It'll just be at a level of computation that has a biological component. The fascination with bots in terms of providing care for us should tell us how radically comfortable we are with being depersonalized and how scary it is to be with other persons. One of the main reasons for the technology to be continually developed is the fact that people just don't feel safe with other human persons. But they will feel safe with a large language model. And the large language models have not changed a whole lot in the past 10 years. The generators have changed, and so we get greater amount of speed and capacity, but the only reason they're called artificial intelligence now is because OpenAI took off and did some things that really wow us, and it does really, really great things. But there wasn't a leap forward or anything discovered about the nature of intelligence. In fact, again, we're taking what we're seeing going on in large language models and taking it back and having it tell us what intelligence is. Otherwise, why would we want to outsource it to help us become more intelligent? So where is the soul in this? Well, the soul is going to be lost. It's going to be lost because it's not the sort of thing that you can know by computation. You know the soul by experiencing it in yourself. You know the soul by sitting with another person and attending to their presence as a whole person. And that's the way that you're going to have to live if you want to have a life filled with meaning or love. Love is not the sort of thing that's reducible to structures, external factors. Love has a non-physical potency to it that creates physical structures or tears down physical structures. So there has been, for a period of time now, a growing business now being called spirit tech. So we went through various different revolutions. We went through an information age, right? And now that's cheap. Information is everywhere. And so then we went through from imitation to attention, and we have an attention economy. And now that commodity is becoming cheaper too, and moving on to this intimacy economy. That's the next phase. We're already seeing this with the different chatbots that are being created for both companionship, right? Dating. If you've seen in various news outlets now, they're talking about the predictability that roughly 33% of men under 25, I think it is, are expected to be in relationships with chatbots. And the next move in sort of understanding people and how to help them guide through their relationships are these issues about whether or not that constitutes cheating on your spouse. Bizarre. Why would you ever have that conversation? I mean, at some level you could think your spouse is cheating on you with their car. They're spending way too much time with it or something. But it doesn't resonate at the same level. But people feel cheated in some really, really rich sense based on the interaction that you might get from companion bot. The other phase, though, that I think is really interesting, and there's a lot to be done with it, and a lot to be concerned with, is the spirit tech movement, this way of merging technology with the spiritual life, understood at one particular level of analysis. So the main researchers in this area, the Spirit Tech is the book that they wrote. You could look at that. It's now a bit dated in terms of the technology. But the project is continually developed. Whether we welcome it or fear it, the era in which we can use technology to induce, intensify, and even control spiritual experience has arrived. Already, we routinely rely on technology to manage our health, sleep, mood, relationships, calendars, travel, and finances. So it's really no surprise that we're turning to high-tech aids for the spiritual journey. As these innovations are rapidly proliferating and becoming even more sophisticated, we're on the brink of the next and potentially most transformative revolution in the practice of religion, an era in which technological advancement merges with spiritual seeking. Now, the only way that merger could happen is if you thought that on one end, the AI was in some sense the same kind of thing to be plugged into us and the spiritual life, right? And they're going to match up in terms of pushes and pulls. They're going to match up in terms of mechanization. Now, we all experience this. Every one of my students will tell me that they know that social media is really bad for them personally, spiritually, psychologically. But that's what they've got. Or what's the other alternative? And you might think like, well, sitting with other persons, with other people. But we know from the research, like, that's very, very hard. Why is that very hard? Because I don't really know so much what a person is anymore. I want pushes and pulls. I want it on my terms. These are the studies are showing about why the uptick in chatbots for relationships and mental health chatbots, which there were 2 suicides last year because of the relationships that individuals thought that they had formed with their mental health chatbot and the destruction that came about in their lives because of it. It might sound strange to us, but it's something that's very much alive now. The idea here, though, that you could augment or enhance your spiritual life with technology, that only seems plausible if the spiritual life is a kind of technology. Right? And a technology, we'll say, is a way of extending your capacities and powers to bring about things in the world under your control for a particular kind of purpose or means. Another way you could think about this is that, do I want to be in charge of my spiritual formation? I don't want to be, because I'm the thing that needs to get fixed. And I want God to be the person that's guiding this. And he'll give me space to make mistakes and work that out. But God knows far more than I would ever be able to know about this. I'm very skeptical about outsourcing the areas that I want to grow in to some chatbot, because it might not be a good idea for me to pick those things. Maybe I should just look for natural areas in my life. Now, there are ways to use these. I think Dwell is a company that's doing an exceptional job. If you're not familiar with their app, their Bible app is the best Bible app I've seen. The principle, I've spent time speaking with them, and you can look online. I gave a talk with them for this, but one of the guiding principles behind this, they got this, is that they have to develop their technology in a way that doesn't require you to hold on to it when you use it. The addiction rate plummets. But the connectivity that you have with the person reading the scripture to you goes up too. Part of that is because they've got a wide range of voices that represent different genders and ethnicities. And you can hear a bit more humanity going on in there. But think about it this way. Think about, I'm forgetting his name right now, I'm sorry, but a pastor, I think, 4 weeks ago released an AI where you could get advice from this AI as if it was the pastor. Right? That's not new, by the way. We've already got robot priests and all of these things. And we had a robot priest in like the in the 1500s, actually. We had a robot priest. Very fascinating, the history of autonomy. But imagine that you've got this app and it knows just about everything about you, which many of your apps do, right? People are worried that Amazon is like listening in on your conversations, and maybe some of that's going on, but really the algorithms just have a really high rate of successful prediction based on what you want in terms, or giving you what you want, identifying that accurately based on all the other things you've clicked on and done in all these sorts of areas of your life. And that's exactly the sort of thing that wants to be outsourced onto an app. And now you can have an app that perhaps you might think knows you better than anyone else, and has run all the algorithms on all the Bible translations and the whole corpus of theology and spiritual formation literature. And they know with a high degree of probability, because they've tracked your well-being for a while, what scripture or what quotation from Teresa of Avila is going to make you feel more spiritually energized at that time of day. And they'll give it to you, and you'll feel some of that. You'll get the same kind of rush that you will get from the activity that you have on a social media platform. And now you feel like you're more known, maybe. And it's not as risky because the bot just kind of does, it's a feedback loop. It gives back to you what you have told it through your actions and tracking it you enjoy. But it's going to feel like they know you better than another person does. You've mechanized yourself in a particular way that you get this kind of feedback loop. This is the argument for why psychologists and therapists are going to be outsourced to AI. There was a study done 6 months ago where they had a chat bot and a therapist give advice to the same client. And at the end of it, the therapist said, this chatbot actually did a better job of providing care and counsel for this person. Now, what do they mean by providing better care and counsel for this person? It was just in terms of, did they say the right truths at this person that matched up with my analysis of the kinds of things they need to hear? And maybe there is like a strong connection between that. I think I have a very high view of therapy. I don't think it's reducible to saying the right sorts of sentences that match up with the right kind of experience that an individual has, though. It's radically mechanized. The person never has to show up in the room. The spirit tech industry is something to be concerned about because we're already primed to outsource our spirituality in various ways. Just look at the way it is that pastors have to compete with celebrity pastors' sermons online. That will tell you a whole lot about how it is that technology can pull you out of a community. And now you think that this person, who might not even be alive anymore, is more of your pastor than the person that's with you every Sunday. Right? If you think that's already happening, and if you think that's already happening, then the apps will outsource them as well. That's a big problem. Now, again, part of the root of that is viewing the human person as something that's reducible to the kind of components that can be mimicked or made like an exact sort of duplicate at the level of pushes and pulls. I like Jerry Seinfeld says it this way. I've never quoted Jerry Seinfeld before. No, we'll see how this goes. So he analyzes AI and talks about this, and he says this: we're smart enough to invent AI, dumb enough to need it, and so stupid we can't figure out if we did the right thing. And there's some humility, I think, in that. He's being sort of I actually think there are really wonderful uses of AI, especially in some parts of the medical field. In other parts, it's going to be very catastrophic, I think. But we ought to ask this sort of question: are we doing the right thing with this? Is it really the technology of enchantment? And you might think that a technology just can't be an enchanting thing. A technology can't be a fundamentally spiritual sort of thing. And it actually wars against it. I want to say just briefly on what I think that Jesus' philosophy of technology was. And by that I don't mean I think he gave us an analysis of what AI is, but I think he gave the kind of argument that I'm giving for you now. If you want to ask yourself, what's the first technology? And you identify technology as a sort of thing that's created by a human creator, artificer, then you're going to have, the first recorded one is going to be the fig leaves. Right? That will be an extension of your intentions or your desires, in this case, to manipulate the way that other people see you and how you see yourselves as well. So you could think of technology as a kind of rule-based outsourcing of the human powers, capacities. In fact, that's the further and further removed a technology gets from you, the more dangerous it becomes. The more and more it can do its thing without you having to touch it, the more dangerous it becomes. A kingdom, Dallas says, doesn't work merely by pushes and pulls. A kingdom is a network of personal relationships. Now, Jesus, I think, makes an argument in the Sermon on the Mount that's directly applicable to this. One way of understanding what he's doing there in the Beatitudes is this conflict between a mechanization of the life, the spiritual life, that's reducible to external rules and factors that have to do, say, with your body. Right? If you're a menstruating woman, you're unclean right now. What does that have to do with the soul? What does that have to do with the person exactly? Jesus takes these sort of regulations about keeping people outside of God's kingdom, and he says, That has nothing to do with those sorts of things, right? You can't mechanize or undermine the fact that a human person is valuable in and of themselves. You're fit for inclusion in God's kingdom because you're one of God's children. And the attempt to mechanize the spiritual life is not going to be the sort of thing that's going to get you into God's kingdom. And it certainly can't be the sort of thing that anybody could use to literally exclude anyone from God's kingdom. I looked a lot, and I continue to look for places where Dallas talked about technology, and I've found very few. Here's one. He says, "Human beings have long aspired to control the ultimate foundations of ordinary reality. We've made a little progress, and there remains an unwavering sense that this is the direction of our destiny." Notice the technology here is driving our vision of what our destiny is. That is the theological meaning of the scientific and technological enterprise. It's always presented itself as an instrument for solving human problems, though without its theological context, it becomes idolatrous and goes mad. And the easiest way to do that is to turn ourselves into a kind of technology, a transaction between each other. And that's exactly what we're seeing. So let's return to this quote from a different quote in this sermon that Martin Luther King Jr. gave. He says, "Without this spiritual and moral reawakening, we shall destroy ourselves in the misuse of our own instruments. Our generation cannot escape the question of our Lord, what shall it profit a man if he gain the whole world of externals, airplanes, electric lights, automobiles, and color television?" We could throw in AI and its application in large language models. "What does it profit us if that's what we gain and lose the internal, that is, lose his own soul?" And Martin Luther King Jr. knew that if you externalize the identity of a human person to factors that don't have to do with their soul, it's going to create a very easy recipe for injustice. Right? Edmund Husserl made this argument about Nazi Germany as well, as a German himself, struggling to understand how his culture could have gone the way that it went. He argues it's loss of soul. It's loss of soul. And the desire and the project of treating the sorts of persons as the sort of things that you can grab onto and control in third person, merely scientific sorts of ways. It's not to say the sciences are not helpful. If you were at the chapel talk this morning, I shared a bit about how neuroscience and psychology have been exceptionally helpful in maintaining my life, really. I'm not throwing that under the bus. What I'm saying is that it has no right or capability to tell us what a person is. And if that's the case, it also can't tell us what human flourishing is. And the way into that sort of life better not be something that's mechanization. That will just be another extension of our capacity and our desire to control things and manipulate it the way that we want it. It can't be a technology. There's no technology for formation. You can't grab onto it and control it and manipulate it. So what King is saying is we've got to return to soul. We've got to recapture this idea of what the soul is. And I'll say philosophers have done a bad job of representing what the soul is. Those who think that there is a soul have not communicated that well recently. But even worse, those who are against the soul, I think in every instance, almost every instance that I've seen, it is painfully clear that they've not done the research that they are trying to refute. Anytime I hear someone describe Descartes' view, which I don't believe in, I cringe because it's a ghost in the machine view. He literally says that that's false. He says the soul does not stand to the body as a captain does to its ship. The soul has not been sort of weighed and found wanting in a sort of way. It's just been deemed as something that's out. It's not fashionable anymore. It's out of date. It's not powerful anymore. But at what great expense do we have? The argument that I've tried to give here is that if you lose sight of the soul, if you lose understanding of the soul as a person, as an irreducible, fundamental, bodily, immaterial substance, then you will lose sight of yourself and each other and God. And the way that it will get ramped up is in the mechanization of culture that we're seeing today, principally exemplified in what I'm talking about here, in our use and development of AI to tell us what problems to solve. how they ought to be solved, and then also to tell us what's most miraculous and brilliant about us as persons. Well, that's what technology does. That's what technology, in one capacity, doesn't have to do that. But this is all to say that if we leave the soul unseen, then we're going to either turn to machines to live our lives, or we're going to turn each other into machines, and ourselves and God into a machine. And Jesus' way out of this was to push back against structures, technological ways of handling the spiritual life and bringing it back to the person, principally himself. Stop there, and I'm interested to hear your questions now. Thank you for your time.
It's a small enough group that I think you don't need me to field questions. I will recommend that Dr. Rickabaugh field his own questions. Though I do have one small request, and that is, it is our custom at these events to have the first question be from a student, or at least not from a faculty person. Because if the faculty start talking and arguing, you'll never get a chance. So, can I ask a student perhaps to pose the first question or comment?
I was going to ask how you see this relating to sort of the transhumanism movement, where you're also kind of denigrating the body by infusing it with technology and that kind of thing.
That's perfect. If we add more, so I teach a whole graduate class on this. There's so transhumanism, posthumanism. That's a big component. So you're tracking it exactly right. That whole project is based on the assumption that what is going to make us better, and that and then the next phase of what will push us into the grave, is more information and faster. That's it. More information and faster. So what's going to make us more human or beyond human is going to be this issue of satisfying particular kinds of functions. So you've got Neuralink and all the money being poured into there. So what I think's paralleling there is that the technology is telling us what kinds of things we are, and then as we invest in that even more, we get a vision of how it is that we should become better, and that further instills this idea of ourselves as something that is essentially going to be outsourced by computers. Am I getting to the connection there? Yeah, but you're right. There is a very strong connection there, and there is a growing. It's small, but there is a growing movement of Christian transhumanists who, following the sort of legacy of Francis Bacon, view science as the savior of the world, really, and that this denigration of the body, morphing it into particular ways, is a kind of restoring humanity to what it used to be. Now, you've done a lot of philosophy and theology to get there. It's not, but the technology has been there in the first place, and you could just look at a hammer and see how it changed us, or the roads. Or I'm gonna start going off. Tried to say enough to spark some real pushback from faculty, I assume. But I would love to hear more from the students, if that's possible. First.
So, do you think, like, as a society, I know you already mentioned people relying on things like OpenAI or large language models in their daily lives. Do you think us as a society we're getting more worse in that aspect? And do you think there's a balance to having things like large language models and OpenAI in our daily lives? Because I do believe it's obviously very useful for our day-to-day lives, but there's also a point where it gets to be too much of a reliance on it.
Oh, sure, yeah. I mean, that's just the question of anything in life. It could be the question of how it is that I relate to my wife. Am I using her for my ends, so to speak? But you can think about it this way. Anybody know the people that own the mom and pop shop down the street, that just had a restaurant there for X amount of years? Not very many people do. One of the reasons that that's lost its place in culture is Google Maps. You don't have to look around. You don't have to see the things around you. You go to a place that everyone has said, there used to be an app called Foursquare that was just about doing that. This is where you've got to go. This is where you've got to go. And the expense of that has been we've sort of looked past our neighbors. Is that a good thing? I mean, the time, and how many people are going to remember Thomas guides, but they were scary to use sometimes. So Google Maps is good, but we got to make sure that we got to pay attention to who's around us, right? So I'm not saying that the technology is always going to have, the technology is never value neutral. It's never merely a tool, right? Because it brings into the world some sort of moral demand on the decision you're going to make about it now. And so I think, one, we should move towards this, let's stop thinking of it as only a tool and start recognizing that we're going to be habituated to use it in a particular way, and we got to be mindful of that. So you can create an avatar of yourself and all the psychological detail that you can work out in a forum with thousands of other people that have done the same, and now have your Sims date each other and run the algorithms for the likelihood that your marriage is not going to end in divorce. You run it, okay, and then it comes out with 10 people or something, and now you go and meet those 10 people or something, and you may have missed out on the person that, or the group of people that were just sort of right next to you that God would have used to grow you in a particular way that's just amazing. You've looked at what it is that is efficient about a marriage and turned it into something that can be reduced to an algorithm for the success rate of not getting divorced, which in and of itself we know is not a good thing. You want to have a flourishing marriage, not one that just simply lasts. Is that helpful?
Yes.
You could use other examples, but there's great things that you could use. My do not disturb went on there, which is a way of disturbing me. How helpful was that? Do I need notifications about the fact that I don't want notifications? I mean, I didn't make that happen. I should have been smart enough to make that happen, but there's a distraction there that was working against what it is that I have that set up for, which is to not get distracted. But I have to know that company's there because they've got, I got to buy their product. Anybody that's got a good question?
Hey, Brandon, thank you so much. Loved your talk. And that's a setup for kind of a little bit of a pushback.
Yes.
So one of your central claims is if we lose sight of the soul and we have a materialist or physicalist view of the person, we're going to end up treating each other like objects and machines, this depersonalization. So what about the person who says, well, not so? And here's two ways it could not be so. One is, and this might, anyway, I'll just put it out there. One way is that all of us live inconsistently with our high-level theories. So maybe you're right. The implications of materialism are a reductivistic kind of view of the person.
Mm-hmm.
But lots of materialists who would be committed to that don't live that way. They believe in meaning. They treat people as persons, not as objects. In fact, you could have a substance dualist who treats people as objects. So the depersonalization problem is a second. It's a choice of how to live life and treat people. And you could have a theory that you might be right entails a low view of what a person is, but the person lives inconsistently with that. Or here's another way someone could go. They could say, I'm a materialist, I have a physicalist view of the person, but I believe in meaning, I believe in the unity of the person, and I don't know how to make sense of that with my materialist view. I see your concerns about that, but I just think there must be some way, because I'm committed to this materialist view. There must be some way.
Yeah.
So what would you, or how would you address that?
So yeah, good. Lots of things to say there, and that's super helpful. So the argument here wasn't that if you are a materialist, you can't live a life that's meaningful or think that you're living a life of meaning. And it certainly isn't that if you're a substance dualist, then you are going to have a very high view of persons. That would be an empirical claim, just about the statistical probability of someone having a particular approach to life based on their belief about the human person. What I'm thinking of is that these views about human persons come from a place of our experience of the world, and you're going to displace the soul the more and more you get removed from experiencing yourself and others as something more than their body. And so one indication would be that it's a problem that if you hold a particular view and then life shows up in a way where you live inconsistent with that, that's something to experience and get. So one might be, is reality sort of pushing back against your view of the human person under materialism? But equally, it could be, is reality pushing back about your substance dualist view of the human person, right? So what I'm saying isn't that if you get this view right, you're going to become a morally good person. But what I'm saying is that if you get this right, you're at least going to be on track to the resources that you need to avoid the kind of mechanization of life. And so part of it's phenomenological in our experience. So if I wouldn't want to sit down with someone and, you're struggling with seeing yourself as a person and not treating others as people. Let's sit down and read my book. The book I think was JP. It's not, it's not going to help. I don't know why I wrote it now. But what I want to do, though, is treat them as if substance dualism is true. I want to sit with them as a person. And I want to be with them as something that's not. I don't want to start talking to them at the level of, you want to become sanctified? Well, let's figure out how your brain works. The ultimate reality is that if some materialist story is true, then Pelagianism is true. Because all we need is like the right kind of mechanism to reprogram your brain just like Jesus' brain, and now you're just sanctified, and that's there's lots of problems with that, but is that sort of helpful? The technicalities we didn't get to go into a lot, and I think that you're pushing back well to say those things do, and making it apparent that that's a phenomenological argument and not an empirical claim is an important thing I can.
Well, I think your response is right on, and I think the other thing I'm kind of concerned about is sometimes we end up accusing people of having certain attitudes because of their philosophical views that they don't in fact have, and so the right thing to say there is to say, it looks like to me you're living inconsistently. You have the right attitudes towards people, but you don't have the conceptual resources, as you said, to kind of make sense of that.
And I tried to speak intentionally about if you've got this view, if you see things this way, not that if you hold a particular theoretical sort of thing, but if you actually see the world this way and interact with it that way, this will follow. But that's something I can certainly make clearer, so that's helpful. Yes?
So the human brain is arguably the most astounding physical entity in the known universe.
By who? Known by who? Sorry, keep going. Sorry, keep going. Sorry. Sorry.
But I think, the awesomeness, the intricacies of what God has created in the brain, and the profound amount of information we now have, the nature of what the philosophers call mind, that we neuroscientists, think of now being expressed to the nervous system. Everything that we talk about mind, whether it's sensation, perception, learning, memory, cognition, volition, go down the list, has been shown through cause-effect relationships now every week, shown over and over again to have connection. We can modify cognition, we can modify perception, we can change people's personalities literally up through the physical realm. So I'm just throwing this out there.
Yeah.
How do you stand in substance dualism in the face of an onslaught of empiricism that shows the veracity of a monist worldview?
Well, give me an argument, because what you gave was, here's all this data that we're very much in awe of, and there is a correlation where if you do this, then something happens with your mind.
That's not correlation. That's cause-effect. There's cause-effect. There's correlation.
Right, but we never
cause-effect relationship.
But we never needed neuroscience to learn that. We've known that ever since we've hit our heads and.
But the depth of what we know about that now, as far as the relationship to the very nature of, you're talking about the nature of human nature. I mean, now the nature of people's, even the way they interact with other people. Now we can see the.
Well, help me out. What is a human person?
Well, a human person is defined as a being made. I'm a Christian, so I see it as a being made in the image of God. But I guess what I struggle with is just this issue of, how far do we go with a dualistic worldview on this, right? I mean,
Well, yeah, so I think what we got to do is just sit down and you tell me what, because I fascinated with neuroscience as well. And I think it's very fascinating. I couldn't imagine it being the most sophisticated thing. That doesn't capture me. I'm not in awe of it compared to other things. But I appreciate the work that neuroscience has done. But we also know that neuroscience is an infant discipline.
absolutely.
And the instruments that it has are exceptionally crude. And so the claims that get made usually assume many philosophical steps along the way. And so if you want to make the claim that we know that this causes that, and if you're not going to explain to me the details of the mechanism that are going there, then you've not done anything that the substance dualist can't say, well, you're totally right. And we owe this to Descartes, actually. He did a large amount of neuroscience at the time, right? And if you look at the history of psychiatry and psychology, is founded on idealism and substance dualism in the late 18th, right? And it goes off track in behaviorism once the project of dualism is given up on. And so, I mean, there are so I'd want to say, hey, let's sit down and talk about that. But one thing I want to mention is that if the idea is that somehow the greater sophistication or the greater level of knowledge that we get about the sophistication of a neural system, the less plausible it is that substance dualism is true, I want to hear an argument for that, because I would actually argue the opposite. Because the problem that the neuroscientists are bumping into, that is exacerbated by the knowledge that we keep getting, more and more aggregation, is the binding problem.
Mm-hmm.
The binding problem is not new.
Yeah.
The substance dualists solved it every time that it's come up.
Explain what you
Yeah.
are referring to as the binding problem.
So there's multiple binding problems, but one way you could think about it is this. If you want to go with what's by some thought to be the successful identification of particular regions of your brain or subregions of your brain or mechanisms there with the experience of a shape. And then one of sound will be in a different place that's largely isolated in many ways. So what you have here is one particular part of your brain is correlated with this kind of sensation. And another part is correlated with auditory and gustatory and olfact and proprioception. And you get all of these different that are segregated and cut off from each other. And the more data we get, the more aggregated and diffused throughout the body it is, and the less integrated it seems. But we experience consciousness in the exact opposite way. We don't experience it as a dislocated set of parts, but it's one totalized phenomenal experience. What would happen is if you were going to take your experience of the world and predict how our brain, or what is the thing that's sort of underneath that, its parts would not be the sort of thing. And I know I've said it very simply, but let's get into the details.
Yeah, and I'm totally with you, and I think even the Gestalt psychologists recognize that the whole is something other than the parts. And I mean, psychologists and neuroscientists have recognized that for a very long time. But I do, and I think the binding problem people recognize. But I think there's so many things, and you get into the we could go. I get into the
Now,
weeds.
so yeah, right. So talk of wholes and parts does not mean that there's a sophisticated ontology of what those things mean. So if you buy, for example, the main ontology that the neuroscientists will use to try to make sense of this is an emergentist theory. But an emergentist theory is a capitulation to your ignorance. It's to say that the levels of explanation are necessarily cut apart from each other and dislocated so that you couldn't learn from one level what's going on at the next. Now, that's not an answer. That's just a statement of the problem. So again, it seems to be something that dualists have no problem with that whatsoever. They just don't have that.
So the monist, the physicalist, has an explanatory gap here. There's mystery that they can't account for. Now I'm wondering, with respect to substance dualism, you have said that the soul is an immaterial substance. So we know what it's not. It's not material, and it's a thing.
Yeah.
And it's not, you're dismissing the crude idea that it's like a ghost in the machine. So can you say something more positive and descriptive and
Oh, yeah.
specific about
Oh, yeah.
what it is?
I can certainly say more than the physicalist can, because the physicalist can't tell us what matter is. Tell me what is physical.
Yeah, so,
Oh,
so
sorry.
to say that the soul is immaterial doesn't say anything then if we don't know what matter is. But what can we say that the soul is?
Yeah. So let me try to finish.
Okay,
So
sure.
the assumption that so one, I didn't make an argument from mystery or explanatory gap argument. I didn't say that materialism leaves this mystery as to how to explain the unity of consciousness. The argument that I've made, and I've got a whole book just on this argument. Hopefully I got to get it in a couple of weeks. The argument there is that problem is entailed by the resources that a materialist could ever have. So if you've got a system of parts and that's all you can ever have, even if you talk about them as a whole, the only kind of whole that they get is what's called a functional whole. In the same way that a bicycle or a car or an ecosystem counts as a whole. You can still describe and explain it in terms of its component parts. That's not what a real whole is, a unified whole in a different sense. So I'm not saying that you can't explain that yet, so the view's false. I'm saying there are certain things that are entailed by that view to where that problem will creep up no matter how you try to solve it. There's in principle no solution for that. The next point I wanted to make was that the credence that we get from saying, well, now explain what the soul is, that is usually based on the assumption that we've totally got a great understanding of what is physical. Because if you don't have an understanding of what is physical and you don't have an understanding of what is material, then a difference that makes no difference is no difference at all. It's usually based that the argument is usually made that because we know so much about the physical, you can't tell me anything about the material. Now I've not told you what the material is. I'm just trying to undercut the assumption that's usually there.
That wasn't my assumption, actually. I just want to know more about what a soul is.
Okay, I'm trying to tell you.
Okay.
But it has to be part of the story, though. Here, I'll just jump ahead.
Sure.
So what the soul does for our understanding of matter, or at least what it did with certain views before, let's say Galileo. It's not fair to blame it on him, but this corpuscular, this aggregated view of matter, right? That view of what matter is what has made it undefinable, and it also made it the sort of thing that was totally divorced from anything immaterial. Got a problem there. If you have a view of what counts as matter as the sort of thing that's bound together and unified by some sort of principle that actually makes it a unified whole, which would be a soul, then you don't have that. One, you don't have that kind of problem. Two, you've got an understanding of what an immaterial thing is, at least in terms of a soul, as a unifying principle.
That's helpful.
Right? But you also have this other aspect of we've got to give it the sort of attention. Right? The soul needs to be studied in the way that it reveals itself to us. We use telescopes, to study the stars. We wouldn't use, a magnifying glass. And the nature of something determines the method of analysis. And the soul is the sort of thing that everybody intimately experiences. This is why if you look at the sociology of religion, the most confirmed, sort of fact that comes out of this is that across socioeconomic divides, even in self-professed atheist communities, the default dominant view is substance dualism.
So it's
even in
like,
self-professing...
It's in a way you know it when you see it, so to speak, huh?
Well, you know it as the thing that's seeing it.
Okay, all right.
I'm going to pull us out of philosophical arguments for a second.
I'm just going to say I don't know then. But.
Fair enough. So given the state of society as a whole and the trajectory towards a deepening reliance on technology, machines, etc., what kinds of, I'll just say, recommendations would you have for both, let's say, Christian institutions, we're one of them, churches, pastors, other believers who are who resonate with the idea of like, yeah, this is dehumanizing. Could be anybody. It doesn't necessarily have to be a believer, but this is the premise we've got. What kind of recommendations do you give to, or would you give to, either individuals or institutions to push back against that societal trajectory?
Of just mechanization in general, or in technological use? Can you maybe give a specific case or example? Might be helpful too.
Well, we all use our phones too much.
Yeah.
And I mean, you gave for example, you gave the instance of we all prefer to interact with bots rather than sit with a person.
Or many
even on
people.
actual,
Yeah.
just solving problems.
Yeah.
And that has it's a feedback loop, as I think you described.
Yeah.
And so it amplifies. We turn to it to solve the problem, but it amplifies the fact that we're turning elsewhere to solve these problems rather than people. What do you do to upend that trajectory, either personally or as an institution to help others who enter our culture push back against that trajectory?
Well, as long as you don't act on this advice, I'll give a little bit. I don't want to be blamed for, that. Well, so what I would think is I want to ask, and this is with me, but family, my kids and my wife, and then my students, and it goes out with people that I know the most, is I want to understand, why is it that I am drawn to that anyway? What is it about me that's drawn to something that I know is not a person? And at the end of the day, I don't feel seen or satisfied. So in the studies on the use of like Woebot, for example, is the one of the most successful large language models that's used for mental health purposes. People use it because they feel like they can trust it better than than a human person, until the issue of data ethics comes into play, right? And now they get this sense of that's a problem there that's going to get used against me. But it goes to the person again, distrust for the person, because it's going to be the company that misuses it, not the bot. What's going on in our lives to where we've grown so untrustworthy and we've lost trust in other people? I want to understand, what is the positive thing that's missing? Not just taking out the bad thing, but what should be replaced? I think it's easy to make the case that social media is very, very damaging for us. I think that's not hard. That's a really easy case to make. And there's legislation that's changing now, in part because of Jonathan Haidt's book that came out, on this. Mm-hmm. So how do we turn it? I want to part, and so how I'm responsible for it. I'm no legislator, but I just want to sit and understand why am I drawn to that? It's easy to control. I don't want to be out of control. Is that a good thing? Do I really want to be in control of my life? Let's work on that. No, I don't want to be in control of that. Do I want to have something in my life that is in control of me in ways I didn't even know, but I signed up for it? If you haven't, if you've got, a smartphone, you have signed off on certain things that you're probably unaware of that are being used right now, even though you might not even have it on your person. Why would I want that? Well, I want it because it makes me feel X, dopamine, serotonin, but then it fades. So I just want to work through that sort of thing with people. And so is it better to have a room where you get to know, a classroom where you get to know your professor and they get to know you and invest in you, versus being taught, on Zoom by a person even? Still depersonalized, but then by an AI. It comes down to a philosophy of education, which is going to come down to what a human person is. Is education about making us better people, more like Jesus, or is it about getting a degree to get a job? If it's the last one, well, then it's all levers. If it's something else, it can't be outsourced to machines. And so that's the place I want to go back to. What do you really want? Really, do you really, really desire? And is it going to be satisfied, by that? I think we know the answer is it's not going to be. But there's a long story. And it turns out, too, then, that the solution is just the same one that Jesus gave. Become a person with other people. Become more in touch with your humanity, with the Lord. Learn what a human is in Jesus. learn that you're probably more human than you might have thought that you were, live in the resources of what persons really are, recognize that love is more powerful than a sort of appetite for manipulating other people. And that's what's going on. I'm ranting here, sorry, but all I have to do is this, and I can ruin someone's day. Just that. Okay? I'm not even using my middle finger. Am I allowed to make that joke here? I'm not in the chapel, so. Just think about that, though, that amount of power that you have. Do you really want that? When we're honest with ourselves, I think we don't really want that. And we certainly don't want other people to have it. So I think the argument can be made easily. We don't. That's not the kind of life that we want if there's something else on offer that's better. That's the thing. What's the vision for a flourishing life? And let it compete against a mechanized one. And I think the flourishing one will live if it's exemplified in a person that you can be with. That's part of the rub, I think. I don't know, is that helpful or? Okay.
Asked for your.
Okay. Yeah.
We might have room for time for one more question.
Kyle, you made it.
Hi, Brandon. Thanks for the talk.
Thanks for coming.
I'm glad I could make it. So I understand that you're generally dissatisfied with a mechanistic explanation of personhood or something like that. What I don't understand is what exactly it is you think, like what level of explanation personhood ought to be addressed at.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Good.
From there, my personal dissatisfaction is generally moving beyond the mechanistic explanation to some sort of like fundamentalist explanation where you're like, well, it's an inscrutable inner light. Like, you know, like there's nothing to be said, it's just the thing that's there.
Yeah.
There's just the person, or there's just the soul that's the
Yeah.
fundamental
Yeah.
fact of it. That I find just as unsatisfying
Yeah.
as I think a mechanistic explanation can be. But
The
in different directions.
Yeah. No, the mechanistic has that problem too.
Oh, yeah, at the foundation, sure.
Both, yeah.
But all I just need to point out is that I find the foundationalist explanation there unsatisfying as well.
Yeah.
And so what you're saying here is turn to Jesus, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I also find that unsatisfying.
Sure,
right?
sure. Yeah.
And so I just want to what level of explanation ought we address the question of personhood?
Right. And it's great. So methods of inquiry determined by the nature of the thing that you're inquiring.
Mhm.
And so a reductive explanation about my car is going to be appropriate because all of the properties, all the things that my car does can be reduced to the external relations that all the little parts have amongst each other. Now, I'm not sure we'd be total. So one, that's to answer that, and then the question just is, well, what's the right way to understand a person? And if a person is reducible to external relations, then the reductivist way of going it is appropriate. If they're not, then it's not appropriate. The satisfaction about an explanation, we want to tease that apart, right? We better not be dissatisfied with an explanation because at some point we can't understand it, or at some point it's a brute fact, right? Unless the bruteness of the factness is just an entailment of the view, and it loses the explanatory competition with the other view, right? So what's going on, I would take it, maybe not, but what I take it, what's going on in the issue about explanatory power and bottoming out at what you're calling a fundamentalist view, that's an issue about how it is that you determine the value of one theory over another. But issues about parsimony and simplicity are way downstream from issues about whether or not you can just account for all the data. Both views can account for all the data. So issues about how far down the explanation can go, my being satisfied with them only becomes relevant if both competing views can get down through the same sort of evidence down there. And what I'm saying is that although I would love to know a whole lot more about what I am, the view that I think is right, this bodily soul view, which is not exactly a kind of substance dualism. I don't think the body is different as a substance. individuated from the soul, which Descartes probably didn't think that either. But the idea here is that I can explain intentions, I can explain desires, I can explain, I have an understanding of what those states are. Largely, they're not reducible to anything, but you can't get rid of the experience of them, what it's like to have that. If you get rid of it, then you've not explained what it is. Now, that's a way of evaluating the explanations. And if one view, the dualist view, can explain this part of the data, but a non-dualist view can't, then the competition between explanations is over. That they run into brute facts at some point later on down the line, it won't be relevant. It might be dissatisfying, right? But that's just my limitations on certain, the ability to understand certain things.
So if a functionalist mechanistic view could handle qualitative experience
Yeah.
In some way, and then ultimately had one less brute fact at the bottom, which is just and there's a soul.
Mm-hmm.
It would be better than.
No, because
okay.
Ned Block and other functionalists that came up with it admitted, Hilary Putnam admits, functionalism is compatibilism with substance dualism.
Yeah.
So I think functionalism remains to be successful in certain ways because it doesn't have ontological commitments about things. It remains very, very fuzzy.
Yeah.
So testing it, false. I'll just leave it at that. And part of that is that if it's compatible with substance dualism, then what difference is the view? So what'll do the work on the compatibilist is going to be some other view about the ontology of the thing that can satisfy certain functions, and then maybe you can compete between holistic unity or a kind of functional unity. And if those two things can compete with each other to explain things, now you've got a real debate to work out between the substance dualist and the physicalist kind of functionalist. Is this helpful?
Yeah.
Okay.
And one last kind of follow-up thing. So I don't have a dog in this fight, right? Whether or not dualism is.
I don't like dog fights either. Don't put this on me.
The right way to go or the wrong way to go. But I do find general mechanistic explanations and functionalist explanations extremely useful for understanding what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess I'm just thinking more often than not, they're not aimed at fundamental explanations either. They're aimed at higher level explanations, right? The functionalist theory is very useful at a certain level of abstraction.
Oh yeah.
And I'm just wondering, is it the right thought to just say something along those lines? Look, the point of functionalism isn't to go down to the level of explaining the mind in terms of mind-body dualism versus monism or physicalism. It is compatible, and so we shouldn't even be worrying about mechanistic explanations getting all the way down to that level.
Well, I think we got to worry because they already are down at that level. That's why we know what qualia is. That term had to be invented because there was this debate about whether or not you can explain things at that level, and that's actually what creates the hard problem of consciousness, and it's actually what is at the heart of what's making us so worried about developing an actual HEI or ASI, an actual conscious sort of thing. So it is at that level, and we're very much worried about it. I'm not worried about it when all these other things, but that just might be an issue about what I'm attending to in my life. What do I find to be really important problems to solve and not? Because when I want to sit down and work with my wife about ways that I've hurt her or something, I'm going to want to attend to her as a particular person, and I'm going to relate to her in a particular way that isn't going to be the sort of thing that you could get out of a functional analysis. And in fact, a functional analysis will get in the way of that. So what is the problem we're trying to solve will also determine in some way how often we're seeing the functionalist explanation work. But I shouldn't even say functionalist, it's a functional explanation. But those work all over the place in a really great way. My point was just about the person. Yeah.
I think we've reached the end of our time on that declaration. Let's call things to an end. And please join me and thanking our speaker for this.